A mother, limping through snow, her body torn by thorns and time. A puppy, barely breathing in a tattered bag, silent as frost. No one knew how far they had walked. No one saw their suffering, until one old dog stood up and led them home. What followed wasn't rescue, it was redemption. Before we start, tell me, do you have a dog of your own? Drop your answer in the comments. I'd love to know who's watching alongside their furry best friend. And if you believe that every animal deserves a loving home, not loneliness, hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to hear might just change how you see the world. The first snowfall of winter came early to Silver Pine, a quiet mountain town tucked beneath the shadow of the Cascade Range in northern Washington. Snowflakes drifted in slow spirals from the slate-gray sky, blanketing the forest floor in soft white silence. The air held that particular stillness that only comes before something begins. In a cedar cabin on the outskirts of town, a man sat on his front porch wrapped in an old wool coat, steam curling from a chipped tin mug in his hands. Walter Dean was not a man of many words. At 68, his body had softened in places but stayed stubborn in others, shoulders still broad, hands still calloused from a life of working the land. He had a face that bore time with quiet dignity. Weathered, lined, eyes as blue as lake ice. Once a forest ranger, then a widower, now a man who talked more to his dog than to any human. He preferred it that way. His cabin stood alone, just beyond the tree line, with no neighbors for miles and no electricity but what his solar panel could manage. And by his side, always, was Ridge. Ridge was a German shepherd, 7 years old, with a thick sable coat and eyes the color of damp earth. Scars traced the back of his left leg, a reminder of the rock slide that ended his days as a mountain rescue dog. But his gait, while slower, was still proud. Ridge had a calmness that filled a room, a kind of loyal silence that needed no translation. He rarely barked unless it mattered. This morning, it did. Walter noticed Ridge lift his head and stiffen. Ears forward, nose high. The old man squinted into the forest, following Ridge's gaze. At first, there was nothing, just snow-draped pines and the distant hush of falling flakes. Then he saw it, a dark shape moving between the trees. No, not moving, staggering. From the forest emerged a female German shepherd, younger than Ridge, perhaps 5 years old. Her fur was matted with mud and streaked with dried blood around her flank and left paw. She limped through the snow, every step a struggle. But it wasn't just herself she was carrying. Clenched between her teeth was the torn strap of a canvas tote, dragging behind her through the drifts. Inside the bag, crumpled like a forgotten toy, was a puppy, barely weeks old, soaked to the bone, unmoving. She stopped at the edge of the clearing, just 20 feet from Walter's porch. She released the strap and looked up, her amber eyes locked onto Ridge's. There was no growl, no panic, only desperation. Walter set his coffee down slowly. Ridge moved first. He rose without a sound, his breath puffing in clouds, and stepped cautiously toward the female. She didn't flinch. He reached the bag, sniffed the tiny body, and turned to Walter with a sharp, decisive bark. Walter didn't hesitate. He grabbed the bag and knelt, lifting the soaked puppy gently from its fabric cradle. It was so small. Its fur was pale cream, curled tightly against its sides. He could barely feel the heartbeat. Ridge remained by his side, standing protectively between Walter and the mother dog, who had now collapsed in the snow. "She's done," Walter murmured, "but not giving up." He looked at Ridge. "Let's get them inside." Walter opened the cabin door and carried the puppy in. Ridge waited for the mother dog, who staggered once, then followed, one limp dragging behind her. The door closed behind them, sealing out the wind. Elsewhere in town, beneath the dim light of the veterinary trailer parked behind Silver Pine's post office, Lana Brooks ran a gloved hand through her ponytail, frustrated. At 27, Lana was known for her sharp tongue, softer heart, and relentless belief that every creature deserved care, even the forgotten ones. She stood 5'7", lean from long days on her feet, with bright auburn hair tied back in a functional braid. Her mobile vet unit, self-funded and barely roadworthy, served as the only animal care option for Miles. She had started it after losing her first dog, Charlie, to a treatable illness because no clinic would see a mutt for free. That loss made her fierce. Today, she was arguing, again, with the town mayor over permits to expand. "No, Mr. Crandall," she said into the phone. "I'm not asking for funding. I'm asking to set up 5 more kennels and a heating unit before the next freeze. You know half these animals won't survive out there." She paced, eyes flicking to a sleeping possum in a heated box. "I understand your priorities," she said, sarcasm icing every syllable. "But maybe Silver Pine could care about something other than its Christmas lights for once." She ended the call before she said something worse and sighed. Behind her, her laptop chimed. An old frequency alert had pinged. Ridge's rescue caller, thought disabled, had just activated outside the grid. Lana's brows drew together. "That's weird." She grabbed her coat. Back in the cabin, Walter had lit the wood stove. The small living room filled with warmth and the smell of cedar. He wrapped the puppy in an old flannel shirt and placed it near the fire. The mother dog, still unnamed, lay curled nearby, her chest rising unevenly, but her eyes never left her pup. Ridge sat across from her, eyes solemn, tail still. Walter reached into the drawer by the fireplace. Emergency heat packs, bottled glucose, cotton pads. His hands were shaking slightly. He hadn't used his field supplies in years, not since his wife passed, not since Ridge retired, but the motions came back like muscle memory. He whispered as he worked, not knowing if the dog could understand. "I don't know who you are, girl," he said, rubbing the pup's paws gently. "But you brought him this far. That counts for something." The wind howled outside, but inside there was only the sound of quiet breathing and one old man trying his best. The fire had dwindled to glowing embers by the time the cabin began to stir again. Morning crept in through the fogged windows, casting a bluish tint over the wooden floorboards. Walter Dean stood quietly at the stove reheating a pot of broth. The scent of thyme and marrow drifted through the room like a warm tide. Behind him, Ridge lay stretched beside the makeshift bed made of towels and flannel where the tiny pup now breathed softly, eyes still closed, but no longer motionless. The mother dog was curled nearby, still panting lightly. Her fur, now drying in patches, revealed a gaunt frame ribs, pronounced hips, sharply angular. But even in her fragility, there was an unmistakable dignity in the way she kept her head turned toward her pup, ears twitching with each stir. Walter set the pot down and walked over to her with a tin bowl of lukewarm broth. He knelt slowly, letting her catch his scent before placing the bowl within reach. She sniffed it, then lapped at it with a trembling tongue, cautious but desperate. He watched her drink for several seconds before speaking, his voice as low and calm as the falling snow outside. "You're tougher than most soldiers I knew," he muttered. As she continued to drink, Walter reached for her collar, a faded strip of heavy-duty nylon, the kind used by working dogs. Beneath the grime and dried blood, his fingers found a metal tag. He held it up to the light. It was scratched and dulled, but the letters were still legible sable. Hester K9 7624. He froze. "Sable," he whispered. "No way." He stood and walked to the corner of the cabin where a steel cabinet sat beneath a layer of dust. Unlocking it, he pulled out a blue folder labeled Incident Reports, Archives. Inside were clippings, articles, and ranger bulletins from his earlier years. Walter's hands, though stiff with age, moved quickly, flipping through dates and headlines until he found what he was looking for. The article was dated just over 6 months ago. Transport crash leaves K9s. Missing in Oregon wilderness. Search called off after 2 weeks. It detailed a vehicle accident during the transfer of working dogs between training facilities. The driver lost control during a rainstorm in a remote canyon outside Bend. While some dogs had been recovered, 3 had fled the scene and were never found. Among the missing Blitz Valor and Sable. The report suggested wolves or exposure likely claimed them, but one photograph showed the trio sitting proudly in front of their transport vehicle. Walter leaned in. Sable was unmistakable, her ears tipped slightly forward, eyes intense, and most notably a faint scar along the bridge of her nose. It matched the ridge of healed skin on the dog now asleep by his fire. Walter set the paper down slowly. He looked back at her. "You've been out there this whole time. 6 months of surviving in the wild. Injured. Alone. Pregnant. Giving birth somewhere cold and hidden. And now, here she was dragging her pup to the only warm light she must have seen in miles." Walter returned to her side. "Sable," he said softly, testing the name. Her ears twitched. "You remember it, don't you?" Meanwhile, down in Silver Pine, a narrow old building sandwiched between the hardware store and a defunct bakery bore the hand-painted sign "Pine and Past," vintage finds and curiosities. The inside smelled of wood polish and dry books, and it was here that Tyler Hammond, age 10, spent most of his Saturdays. Tyler was a wiry boy with messy blonde hair often hidden beneath a wool cap 2 sizes too big. He had a scattered constellation of freckles across his cheeks and an obsession with anything strange, old, or unexplained. His grandmother Edna, who ran the shop, had long since given up trying to keep him from digging through her backroom crates. Today, Tyler was sifting through a box labeled Old News Clippings, 2000s. He wasn't looking for anything in particular, but when he pulled out a folded article with a blurry photo of 3 German shepherds, he paused. Transport crash. Leaves. Canines missing. He read the headline aloud under his breath, then skimmed the content, quickly, lips moving. His eyes stopped at the name Sable, and the photo. Something about the eyes. The same sharpness, the same gaze. The night before, Tyler had been scrolling through his town's community feed when someone posted a strange, grainy video. It showed a cabin in the woods lit from inside and a dog limping through the snow with what looked like a bag in its mouth. The video cut off as a second dog approached and barked sharply. Comments exploded underneath. "Did someone dump puppies again? Is that Ridge? I thought he retired. That dog doesn't look feral at all. That's trained movement." Now, Tyler looked back and forth between the photo in the newspaper and the paused, still on his phone. "No way," he muttered. "That's her." He tucked the article into his backpack, eyes wide with possibility. He didn't know yet what it meant, but he felt like he'd just stumbled onto something big. Back in the cabin, Sable had finished most of the broth. Ridge had moved closer to the shoebox where the pup, now slightly more animated, gave a tiny stretch before curling tighter again. Walter sat beside them all, resting his elbows on his knees, eyes flicking between Ridge, Sable, and the pup. "You didn't give up," he said aloud, not sure who he was talking to. "And I can't either." He reached over and ran a gentle hand down Ridge's back. Ridge leaned into the touch, eyes never leaving the pup. Sable's head lowered again, her breathing slowing. For the first time since she arrived, she seemed to sleep deeply, her body no longer braced against threat. Outside, the sky remained overcast, thick with more snow to come. But inside the cabin, the fire had been rekindled and something else had returned too, something Walter hadn't felt in years. Purpose. The wind pressed soft against the cabin walls, hissing gently through the cracks between old timbers. Outside, the snow lay thick and undisturbed, a pale blanket wrapped around the forest's stillness. Inside, life clung to fragile threads. Ridge lay curled beside the fireplace, his thick coat rising and falling slowly with each breath. One paw rested just beneath the shoebox that cradled the tiny body of the pup. Walter sat in the rocking chair beside them, half dozing, the warmth of the fire seeping into his bones. A shallow bowl of stew steamed on the table beside him, untouched. He blinked at the flicker of flame, mind drifting between memories and the quiet rhythm of the present. A grunt beside him made him turn. Sable. The mother dog shifted. Her body was still gaunt, her left hind leg stiff and tender, but her eyes were more focused, now clearer. She pushed herself up from the folded blanket Ridge had let her share and limped closer to the box where her pup lay. Ridge watched but didn't move, and then, barely audible, a sound broke the hush. A whimper. Walter leaned forward. The pup, still nestled in the flannel, gave a weak twitching motion of its back leg. Its tiny pink tongue flicked once at the edge of its snout. Then, another cry soft as a whisper, but real. "Alive," Walter said under his breath. "He's still fighting." He reached for the shoebox gently. Ridge stood and moved aside with instinctive understanding, letting Walter lift the pup. It was warm now, much warmer than the night before. Its eyelids fluttered. Ridge leaned in sniffing carefully, then gave a slow, deliberate lick across the pup's head. The pup made a noise, half sneeze, half yelp, then squirmed weakly into Walter's palms. Walter couldn't help but laugh. It was hoarse rusty from disuse, but it filled the cabin like sunlight. Sable moved closer, her body brushing Walter's knee. He looked into her face. Her expression for all the world resembled gratitude. "I guess he's earned a name," Walter murmured. "How about Ash?" The name came without thought, inspired by the faint gray dust still smudging the pup's fur, or perhaps by the way he'd survived among dying embers. Ridge let out a low huff of approval. Walter set Ash gently back down and walked to the stove, reheating a small saucepan. This time he ladled a thicker broth into a ceramic bowl, added a few softened vegetables, and let it cool. Returning to the hearth, he sat cross-legged and dipped a spoon into the bowl. He held it to Sable's nose. She sniffed, hesitated, then licked at the spoon. Walter gave her another and another until the bowl was nearly empty. She paused between bites, her breath still labored, but she never took her eyes off her pup. Ridge lay down beside Ash again, forming a barrier of warmth. The fire burned steady. For a long while the cabin held nothing but the sounds of breathing, crackling logs, and the occasional sleepy grunt from Ridge or Walter. Back in town, Tyler Hammond sat at the foot of his grandmother's staircase, clutching his tablet. He had spent most of the afternoon rewatching the grainy video of the dogs outside the cabin. The comments were piling up in the community feed. Most thought it was just another stray rescue, but Tyler knew better, and now he wanted to tell that story. Armed with the article he had found earlier and the video that had started it all, he opened a new project on his editing app. Tyler had a knack for stitching together stories. He often made mini documentaries about birds, raccoons, and occasionally his grandmother's antique clock collection. This time, he was determined to do something bigger. He added a voiceover his own, a little nervous but clear. "Silver Pine isn't a place where you expect miracles," he said. "But last night, something happened. A mother dog appeared out of the woods carrying her pup in a bag. They were half frozen, and no one knew where they came from. But I think this might be the dog from that story, the one that disappeared." He layered the article image beside the video, added slow piano music, and ended the video with a single sentence in white text. "Sometimes the ones we forget come back to remind us who we are." Satisfied, Tyler hit publish. The video went live under the title, "Dog Found After 6 Months in the Wild. Could This Be Sable?" In the cabin, the night deepened, and Walter brought out another blanket. He didn't say much, just shook it open and let it settle over his lap, and the bodies curled at his feet. Ridge raised his head, then relaxed again. Ash gave another soft whimper, louder this time, a high-pitched cry of life echoing into the rafters. Walter smiled, reached for a nearby mug of cooling tea, and lifted it in a silent toast to no one in particular. "To survivors," he said. And, for the first time in a long while, he fell asleep in his chair with peace in his chest and warmth at his feet. The snow had hardened overnight, forming a pale crust across the mountain trail leading to Walter's cabin. The morning sun had barely risen when a gray Subaru crawled its way up the winding path, tires crunching over ice and pine needles. A figure inside leaned forward, face tense with purpose, scanning the thinning forest for any sign of smoke movement or the familiar silhouette of a German shepherd. Lana Brooks. 20:07 pulled the car to a stop near a hand-painted wooden sign that simply read, "No trespassing, unless you're lost or bleeding." She exhaled, adjusted her knit beanie, and stepped out. Lana was tall and lean, with long auburn hair tucked into a low braid and a face both intelligent and tired, eyebrows usually furrowed not from anger, but focus. Her green parka hung slightly open, revealing a stethoscope and a field medical pouch slung over her shoulder. A clipboard sat wedged between her arm and ribs, bouncing slightly as she walked toward the cabin door. She knocked twice, firm and quick. Inside, Ridge lifted his head. Sable stirred, but didn't rise, her body still pressed protectively around Ash. Walter, still in his flannel from the night before, opened the door cautiously. His eyebrows rose. "Lana." "Hi, Walter," she said, her voice brisk but not unfriendly. "I'm here because Ridge pinged an old emergency signal last night. GPS alert flagged it on my system. That caller was retired, but it still calls home if triggered manually." Walter glanced toward Ridge, who remained standing near the hearth, quiet but alert. The dog's gaze flicked from Lana to Ash, then back again. Walter stepped aside. "You better come in." The warmth hit Lana like a wave fire. Stew, wet dog, and something older, a sense of shelter. Her eyes swept over the room, trained from years of field triage. She saw Ridge, first older than she remembered, but steady. Then her gaze dropped to Sable. She froze. "Sable," she whispered. "Oh my God." Lana moved carefully across the room and knelt beside the mother dog. Sable looked at her, but didn't growl. There was only exhaustion in her amber eyes and perhaps something gentler recognition. Walter handed her a damp cloth. Her legs bad, but the pup's worse. Lana set down her clipboard, slipped on gloves, and gently checked Ash's breathing heart rate and temperature. "He's stable," she murmured. "Still weak, but stable." She turned to Sable, inspecting the swelling in the hind leg. "Could be ligament strain, maybe a crack in the metatarsal. She needs imaging antibiotics protein." Walter nodded. "And a miracle, I suppose?" Lana smiled faintly. "You already gave her one." She opened her medical bag and began prepping a subcutaneous hydration shot for Ash. Ridge moved closer, hovering, but respectful. She glanced at him. Still the nurse. "Huh?" she said to Ridge with a half-smile. "Good boy." Walter handed her a bowl of the broth he'd made. "She's been eating slowly." "That's a good sign," Lana said, still working. "But they can't stay here, Walter. Not long term." Walter rubbed the back of his neck. "I figured you'd say that. I have a heated tent enclosure back at my clinic. Separate pens, warmth, constant monitoring. They'll do better there." Walter hesitated. Ridge let out a low exhale, not quite a growl. "I'm not taking them away from you," Lana added gently. "Just taking them somewhere they can heal." He looked at Sable, then at the firelight flickering in Ridge's eyes. "If they go." Walter said slowly, "He goes too." "Of course," Lana said without pause. Outside, she prepared the crate in the back of her Subaru with extra blankets. Inside the cabin, Walter wrapped Ash in a small towel while Lana helped Sable up, supporting her with a sling. The mother dog didn't resist. Her legs trembled, but she kept moving, eyes locked on her pup. Ridge followed without being told. As Lana closed the hatch, Walter stood a moment beside the car, one hand on the roof. The forest was silent again, and for the first time he felt its loneliness return. "I'll check in tomorrow," he said. "You better," Lana replied. "Or Ridge'll come back without permission." She smiled and got in. The Subaru pulled away its tires, making slow, careful turns down the icy road. Back in town, later that evening, Lana sat behind her clinic, a converted trailer outfitted with a generator, a battery-powered heater, and walls lined with crates and folded medical equipment. She pulled out her laptop to upload Sable's data into her case file. As she typed, she checked the National Canine Registry. The facility that once listed Sable as active was marked permanently closed. Under the handler field, no longer affiliated. Lana sighed. "There's no one left to claim you, girl," she murmured. She stood and walked to the pen where Sable now lay curled beside Ash. Ridge stood outside, vigilant. Lana reached down and scratched behind his ears. "I guess we're your new family now." It was mid-morning when Lana stepped out of her clinic trailer, squinting into the soft sunlight spilling over Main Street. The snowfall from 2 days ago had begun to melt, leaving the sidewalks wet and reflecting light like shallow ponds. A breeze carried the scent of pine and chimney smoke down from the hills. Lana adjusted her coat, then opened the back of her Subaru. Inside, Ridge stood poised, head high. Sable lay nestled against Ash, who now blinked sleepily with open eyes, his small tail twitching faintly as Lana reached in. "All right," she murmured. "Let's go make an impression." She had made the decision that morning Sable and Ash needed to stretch, and Ridge clearly preferred being close. The walk to the expanded clinic wing, recently granted use of a spare building by the town council, was only 4 blocks, but it would take them straight through the heart of Silver Pine. The street was already humming with quiet life. Storefronts, open delivery trucks rattled past, and early shoppers sipped coffee outside the cafe. But when Lana emerged from behind the clinic walking beside Ridge with Sable moving slowly on a support leash and Ash tucked into a soft blanket sling across her chest, conversation around them dulled to a hush. People stopped what they were doing. Even the coffee machines hissed a little quieter. Ridge walked steady eyes forward, never more than half a step ahead of Sable. She moved slowly but deliberately, her injured leg still braced but her gaze alert. From the sling, Ash peeked out at the world for the first time, nose twitching at the foreign smells of car exhaust and pastries. Among the onlookers was Tyler Hammond, crouched on the sidewalk with a small video camera in his hands. Today, he wore a too-big denim jacket, sleeves rolled up, and a scarf tied lopsided around his neck. His grandmother had told him about the planned transfer, and Tyler had waited since dawn for a glimpse. He hit record as soon as Ridge came into view. "They're here," he whispered more to himself than to the camera. "She's walking. She's really walking." Beside him, his classmate Amari Lewis, a tall, soft-spoken 15-year-old girl with long braids and a thick green coat, adjusted her glasses and smiled. "That's gonna go viral," she said, pulling out her phone. "We should help get it seen." Tyler glanced at her. "How Student Council has a community board," she replied. "Let's pitch a fundraiser. We've done worse things with bake sales." They both started typing. Ahead, Lana noticed the small crowd forming, but she didn't flinch. She stopped in front of the town cafe, letting Sable rest. Ridge remained planted beside her like a sentry. Lana turned to the people gathering. "This is Sable," she said simply. She survived 6 months in the wild. She carried her puppy through snow to a stranger's doorstep. And she's standing here today because of compassion and because of Ridge. The town's mayor, Gregory Harlan, a balding man in his late 50s with a perpetual frown and a tendency to underestimate things that didn't generate tax revenue, stepped out from the hardware store, arms folded. His wool coat looked like it had never quite been tailored right. He approached, glancing from dog to handler. This, the dog from the video, Lana nodded, and her pup, Ash. Mayor Harlan sighed. "I've received over 80 emails in the last 24 hours, calls from 3 news outlets. One teacher asked if the kids could visit the clinic." Lana waited. He adjusted his glasses. "The council's voting tonight, but I'll make it simple. The permit for your new clinic extension is approved, and if you want to call it the Sable Wing or something, frankly, I think people would eat that up." Lana blinked. "Thank you." He cleared his throat. "Make sure the sidewalk gets cleaned afterward. City standards." Then he turned and walked off. As the group resumed their slow procession, applause began not loud but steady. Someone handed Lana a bouquet of dog-safe herbs. A girl from the bakery offered Ridge a bone-shaped biscuit wrapped in wax paper. Tyler, still filming, whispered to his camera, "This is what second chances look like." By the time they reached the annex building, Lana was overwhelmed not by the attention but by the quiet sincerity in every small gesture. It had taken a mother's desperate act, a retired dog's loyalty, and a boy with a camera to remind a town how to care. That evening, the high school student council officially launched a campaign, Build a Place for Them. Flyers circulated, QR codes went up, and Amari created a digital donation portal. By nightfall, donations had already begun. In her new pen, Sable lay curled around Ash, eyes closed but peaceful. Ridge rested just outside the kennel as if unwilling to sleep too far from them. Lana sat at her desk filing medical notes and adding a new label to her clipboard family unit. Ridge, Sable, Ash. Outside the window, Silver Pine breathed slower, a little warmer than before. Chapter 6: The Healing Room. The room smelled of lavender cleaner and warm flannel with a hint of wet dog and chamomile drifting from a diffuser in the corner. The converted trailer, once sterile and dim, now pulsed with quiet life. Lana had rearranged the pens to form a semicircle around the central heater, adding fleece blankets, soft lighting, and a touch of character. Above the largest kennel lined with thick bedding and reinforced padding, she had tacked a wooden sign that read, Ridge's Corner. She carved the letters herself with a pocket knife paint still fresh around the edges. Sable lay within her hind leg, now wrapped in a firm white cast that extended from hock to paw. The swelling had gone down significantly, and the bruising across her ribs had turned from purple to greenish-yellow ugly, but healing. She was eating again slowly, but without hesitation. Her eyes followed Ash constantly even now as he wobbled clumsily toward Ridge's tail and bit it tail flicking like a kitten's. Ridge didn't even blink. The old shepherd simply shifted slightly, letting the pup gnaw and stumble until he tired himself out and collapsed across Ridge's foreleg like a scarf. Lana stood nearby with a clipboard, one eyebrow raised and a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. She was dressed as usual, faded jeans, fleece-lined boots, and a navy hoodie that read Northwest Wildlife Mobile Vets across the back. Her hair, always in a braid, now had loose strands framing her tired but peaceful face. Outside, the December sky was blue for the first time in days. Sunshine fell in crisp angles through the trailer windows, painting rectangles of light across the floor. On the far side of the clinic, a figure approached slowly, arms full of something steaming and wrapped in a dish towel. Walter Dean stepped up to the open door and knocked with his knuckles. "I come bearing stew," he said. Lana opened the door wider and waved him in. "Same one as last week." "No," he said. "That one was too salty. This one's better." Walter wore a thick wool sweater and olive-green utility pants. His silver beard looked newly trimmed, and his weathered hands held a metal thermos and two ceramic bowls clinking together in his bag. Since Sable and Ash arrived, he had come nearly every morning, sometimes with food, sometimes with tools. He never stayed long, never sat, but today he lingered by the doorway. "I added lentils," he said. "Dogs can't have onions, right?" Lana chuckled. "No onions. Lentils are fine." Walter looked toward Ridge's corner. "She's sleeping better, much better, and Ash has discovered tail-chasing as a new sport." "Good sign," he said, lowering the thermos onto the counter. "Pup like that needs room to get into trouble." Lana hesitated a moment. "I've been meaning to ask, Ridge, how did he activate his emergency signal? That collar was supposed to be disabled years ago." Walter scratched the back of his neck. "Funny thing. Ridge always remembered it. It's old, but I never removed the trigger chip. Just let it stay. Sometimes I think he knows more than we give him credit for." She looked at the dog, who now had Ash curled into his neck. "I believe that." Later that afternoon, the screen door creaked open again, this time with a softer rhythm. Tyler Hammond, bundled in a red flannel coat and faded jeans, stepped in holding a camera strap across his shoulder and a shoebox tucked under one arm. "I brought toys," he announced, "and a clean towel for the pup." Lana nodded toward the corner. "They're yours to bother." Tyler grinned and hurried over. He knelt beside the kennel, resting his elbows just outside the bars. Ash perked up and stumbled toward the familiar scent. Tyler reached a hand through and let Ash lick his fingers, then dropped a small, knotted rope toy inside. "I swear he's grown," Tyler said. "Or maybe he just looks less wrinkly." Walter, now seated on a stool near the window, chuckled. "Puppies do that." As the three of them watched, Ridge shifted his body slightly to let Ash bat at the toy. Sable opened one eye but didn't move. She was beginning to trust the quiet. Outside the trailer, just beyond the garden fence, rows of overturned soil lined the left side of the mobile unit. A makeshift wooden arch had been built from old fencing, its top wrapped in holiday string lights and wild grapevine. Walter had started the project 2 days earlier when Lana casually mentioned she wished the clinic didn't look so temporary. With Ridge supervising, he'd cleared the weeds and turned the soil by hand. Today, small wooden signs marked what he hoped would become a herb and vegetable plot come spring: basil, rosemary, kale, carrots. And in the far corner, a new sign in his handwriting read, "Hope's Patch." I figure, Walter said, gesturing toward the garden with his thumb, if they're going to be here a while, might as well give them a backyard. Lana glanced outside and smiled. It looks permanent. It could be, he said softly. As the afternoon wore on, Tyler filmed Ash playing with the rope. Lana updated medical notes. Walter fixed a squeaky door hinge near the supply cabinet. The sky turned golden, then pale rose. And through it all, the room felt less like a clinic and more like something older, something gentler. Not a shelter, a home. Snow had returned overnight, blanketing Silver Pine in quiet white once more, but it wasn't the kind that threatened or stung. It was the soft kind flakes that floated more than they fell, drifting lazily and gathering like forgotten dreams on rooftops and pines. Inside the clinic trailer, the heat purred gently, and all 3 dogs lay still content, full and unbothered by the cold world outside. Lana sat at her desk, elbows resting on a worn manila folder. The page she was staring at had gone blank 10 minutes ago, and her mind had not. Her hand hovered over the adoption paperwork. The form was simple: name, age, breed, prior ownership, history. But when she reached the section labeled Intended Owner, she paused. Her eyes flicked toward the kennel where Sable now lay with Ash curled under her neck. Ridge sat nearby as always, one eye closed, the other lazily tracking the shadows through the window. She sighed. Walter was due to arrive within the hour. She had already made up her mind, but it still felt right to ask. Just then, a soft knock came at the door. Walter stepped in wearing his heavy flannel coat boots dusted in fresh snow. His face was red from the cold, but his eyes were bright alert. He brought no food this time, just a quiet presence that warmed the room even without a stove. "You're early," Lana said. "I was awake." He looked toward the dogs. "How are they?" "Sable's cast is holding. Ash had a healthy bowel movement and is chewing through my supply of towels. Ridge stole Tyler's sandwich yesterday." Walter cracked a grin. He always had a good sense of timing. Lana stood and walked to the filing cabinet. She pulled the manila folder and turned to face him. "Walter," she said, her voice now steadier. "I checked again. There's no handler left on record. The facility Sable belonged to was shut down 4 months ago. The 2 other dogs from the crash were rehomed and she was listed as presumed dead. There's no one coming for her." Walter listened without interrupting, his jaw working slightly. Lana took a breath. "I was going to post her and Ash on the rehabilitation network. Find a family. But I don't think they need a new family." Walter's gaze shifted toward the dogs again. Ash now had a paw flopped across Ridge's face. Sable didn't even twitch at the movement, her body relaxed in a way that only trust allows. "You've been coming here every day," Lana continued. "Building garden beds, fixing light fixtures, cooking stew, but that's not why I'm asking. I'm asking because when they look at you, they don't look like they're visiting. They look like they're already home." Walter met her eyes. His own were quiet, full of a kind of gentleness that had become rare in men his age. "We're already a family," he said. "We just hadn't gone home yet." Lana smiled. No paperwork needed. They spent the next hour gathering supplies. Lana packed extra medication, a field brace, 2 weeks' worth of dry food, and a basket of hand-me-down toys donated by Tyler and Amari. Walter carried most of it out to his truck, and when the dogs were ready, Ridge hopped in first, followed by Sable, still stiff but moving better, and finally Ash, who needed a slight lift. The drive back to the cabin was quiet. Snow dusted the evergreens as they passed, and the truck's heater clicked softly beneath the dashboard. Walter said little, but his eyes kept checking the rearview mirror, not for traffic but for Ridge's steady posture, Sable's blinking eyes, and Ash's growing wonder at the world outside the window. The sun had just begun to dip when they reached the cabin. Smoke curled from the chimney. Walter had set the timer on the pellet stove that morning. He opened the back of the truck and let Ridge out first. The older dog sniffed the familiar air and gave a soft chuff before trotting to the porch and sitting like a sentinel at the front door. Walter opened the door and let the others inside. The cabin smelled like cedar and fresh bread, the leftovers of the morning's baking. Ash bounded in like a rabbit skidding on the wood floor, chasing dust particles like they were prey. Sable followed slower, her nails clicking softly on the floor, pausing in the center of the room. Walter had built a new dog bed, thick foam-clean blanket, a name tag embroidered on the front. Sable. Ash had his own small one, too, a bit crooked, but lovingly stitched. But neither used them. Instead, Ridge dropped down on the braided rug before the fire. Ash ran over and climbed across his chest. Sable looked at the beds, then at the rug, and made her decision. She joined them, curling her casted leg beneath her, letting her body rest against Ridge's side, her nose brushing Ash's ear. Walter stood for a moment, watching the three shapes blend together like a living quilt of fur and warmth and breath. Then he sat in his chair, sipped his tea, and felt something long dormant settle inside his ribs. It wasn't excitement. It wasn't relief. It was peace. The first day of spring in Silver Pine didn't announce itself with blossoms or birdsong. It came quietly like a sigh through the evergreens, softening the frost on rooftops and coaxing rivulets of snowmelt down the edges of driveways. At the edge of the forest, Walter Dean stepped out onto his front porch. Coffee in hand, the steam curling into the pale morning air. The sky was cloudless, and the wind carried the scent of wet earth and pine needles. He took a sip and paused. At the top step, resting on the porch rail, was something he hadn't noticed yesterday. A smooth river stone about the size of his palm, painted pale blue. In the center, a single black paw print had been stamped carefully, surrounded by tiny, hand-drawn stars. He smiled and turned the stone over. On the bottom, in wobbly Sharpie letters, for Ridge, Sable, and Ash, Tyler. Inside the cabin, the old wooden floor creaked softly as Ridge stretched out before the hearth, now more of a sun-warmed rug than a fire-warmed one. His coat, thick and flecked with graying patches, shimmered slightly in the golden light. Ash was busily engaged in a battle with one of Walter's boots, gnawing at the laces flopping onto his side dramatically, then launching a fresh attack. The pup was now several months old, gangly and mischievous but sharp-eyed and nimble. Sable lay just a few feet away, curled into the corner of the rug with her head raised. Her cast was gone now, replaced by a slight limp that didn't bother her nearly as much as it had Walter. She blinked slowly, watching Ash's antics with something between patience and quiet pride. Every so often her eyes flicked toward Ridge, who barely moved except to flick an ear. Walter stepped back inside and closed the door with his hip. He set the stone off the mantel beside a small framed photo of his wife, a simple gesture, but it felt right. Then he turned to the room and whispered almost to himself, "We might have saved them. But I think maybe they saved us too." Over the last month, life had reshaped itself in gentle, deliberate patterns. Walter woke earlier, walked farther, cooked in batches again like he used to when he had someone to cook for. The dogs had made the space theirs. Ridge still claimed the rug, Sable preferred the spot beneath the windowsill where the sun stayed longest, and Ash, well, Ash had declared dominion over everything, soft, chewable, or shiny. That afternoon, the town of Silver Pine gathered at the grassy park behind the old fire station for the annual Spring Awakening Festival, a tradition that had mostly been about flower pots and lemonade until this year. At the center of the park, beside a stage flanked by dogwood branches and bunting, stood a new wooden plaque. Freshly carved, sealed in varnish, and mounted on a stone pedestal, it read, "The Ridge Family, a story of survival, loyalty, and home." Below it, etched in smaller letters, "Some hearts find their way home, even through the wild." Children gathered around the plaque, pointing at the drawings below the inscription. One of a large German shepherd with noble eyes, a smaller shepherd with a bent ear, and a pup with a flopping tail and a mischievous grin. Lana stood near the edge of the crowd, arms crossed over a canvas jacket, watching with quiet satisfaction. Her braid was looser today, her posture more relaxed. Tyler hovered nearby, holding a camera he'd been given by the town librarian, an old digital Canon, but reliable. He wore a Hope's Patch volunteer button and had one shoelace untied. Walter arrived a little later, wearing his only formal coat and walking at a pace that suited him. Ridge stayed close to his left leg, and Sable walked to his right, Ash bounding slightly ahead like a scout. As they entered the park, the crowd turned. A hush fell, followed by applause, not thunderous, but honest. Tyler snapped photos as Ridge paused at the front of the plaque and sat looking up at it with the stillness of a statue. Sable stood beside him and Ash tried to climb onto the pedestal until Walter gently tugged him back by the harness. Mayor Gregory Harlan, now dressed in a dark vest and more polished than usual, stepped onto the stage. We are gathered today, not just to celebrate the turning of seasons he began, but to honor something deeper, resilience. And in this case, it came in the form of 3 unlikely heroes, a mother, a guardian, and a pup who reminded us all what healing looks like. He gestured to Lana and Walter, and to the people who didn't just help them survive, but gave them back a home. The festival continued through the afternoon with booths, laughter, and food. Ridge calmly accepted a treat from the bakery owner. Sable received pets from strangers without flinching. Ash managed to steal a muffin and escaped into a pile of hay bales before Tyler cornered him. By sunset, Walter, Lana, and Tyler stood together at the edge of the park watching as the lights flickered on across the town square. The dogs lay in a circle at their feet, tired but content. "You did something good here," Walter said to Lana. She shook her head. "We all did." "Still," Walter said, "I think I'm going to keep the name." "What name?" "For the mailbox." He smiled. "Ridge family." Back at the cabin that night, the air was still and the sky full of stars. Walter opened the door and let the dogs inside. Ash made a beeline for his boot. Ridge circled once, then collapsed with a satisfied grunt. Sable curled beside him, resting her chin gently across his back. Outside above the porch, a small wooden sign hung from 2 iron hooks. It had been carved by Tyler and stained by hand. It read, "Some houses, shares, the facts, vinces, you see, research goes to right, they said there's a yes, a hopper, you was this house, or